You don't need to be denied a visa to be blocked from entering the U.S. anymore. No need to break the law, no clear violation required. Just one social media post, one country you once visited, or one algorithm deciding you might be a risk. And the gates to America will quietly close in front of you, without anyone telling you why. Welcome to 2025, where borders are no longer physical barriers, but silent data filters deciding who gets to move and who does not. Visa. Overstay. When a personal mistake becomes a national sentence. In the U.S. of 2025, the concept of individual accountability is being distorted into a mechanism of collective punishment. A single infraction by a few individuals can now freeze an entire channel of diplomacy. And nothing illustrates this more clearly than the silent and far-reaching campaign known as the Visa Overstay Crackdown, a prolonged sanction that quietly affects millions of people who have never broken the law, never violated any rules, and in many cases, never even set foot in the United States. To understand this, one must first look back. Under Section 243D of the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, has the authority to recommend that the State Department suspend or limit visa issuance to citizens of countries with high visa overstay rates. This law isn't new. What is changing, however, is how it is applied. No longer as selective enforcement, but as a strategic throttling of visa flows, sometimes bordering on disguised political retaliation. India, Brazil, Venezuela, three countries publicly named in DHS reports, are now seeing extended visa delays, reduced quotas, and certain categories, like B1, B2 for tourism and conferences, unofficially frozen. But more alarming is the undercurrent of consequences spreading from these numbers. A Nigerian businessman with a transparent financial profile, a valid visa, and no prior violations was stopped at JFK Airport, detained for 7 hours without any specific explanation. No warnings, no infractions, just an invisible ding from the system declaring he had been flagged. This is no longer about individual error. It has become a form of national guilt by association. You don't have to do anything wrong to be suspect. All it takes is carrying a passport from a problem country. A visa no longer guarantees entry. It's merely a lottery ticket in a game of probability where your personal data is scrutinized not just for your actions, but for the collective history of your country. This raises a pressing question about justice in immigration policy. At what point does a person stop being seen as an independent human being and start being treated as a statistical risk indicator? And is a democracy like the United States, once a symbol of opportunity and fairness, quietly sliding toward a policy of collective penalty, with no trial and no transparent rationale? The answer may lie in how border authorities now operate. With the aid of big data and machine learning, screening no longer stops at a prior overstay record. It builds risk profiles from behavioral trends, residential locations, and even familial associations with past violators. A young Vietnamese applicant for a student visa was denied without explanation. Only after hiring an immigration lawyer in New York did he learn that someone with the same surname in California had previously been deported for overstaying. That name similarity, combined with his nationality's high overstay rate, was enough to flag his application as risky. It's hard not to ask, are national security criteria now being interpreted so vaguely that they have lost their moral compass? Because if security can justify entry denial based on the wrong-colored passport, what's next? These systems require no notice, no official rejection letter, no appeal reviewed, just an email that stops replying, an application that never gets scheduled. Countries like Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Nigeria are no longer merely facing visa denials. They're confronting an invisible wall, not built because of what their people have done, but because of what a system thinks they might do. And this wall doesn't have to be tall, it only needs to be silent. Because in that silence, policy becomes most effective. Control without debate, exclusion without declaration, and rejection without justification. In an age when international travel was once considered a right attached to citizenship, America's visa crackdown is turning that privilege into something more fragile than ever before. And the most unsettling part? No one knows when they'll be the next name on the list. Social media is no longer personal. When a single tweet becomes a locked gateway, if there's one defining trait that makes the world more fragile than ever in 2025, it's that the line between digital life and real life has completely collapsed. What used to be private stuff on Facebook, playful photos posted on Instagram, or offhand, sarcastic tweets, all of it can now become evidence against you in a visa screening you'll never be allowed to attend. This isn't some science fiction warning. It's a reality unfolding inside U.S. consulates, where immigration officers are now asking you about a 2021 post expressing your opinion on the Iraq War, a photo of you holding a No More War sign in a public square, or a comment you once left under a video discussing human rights. A young Filipino woman, an environmental studies student, was pulled into a 2-hour visa interview at the U.S. Embassy for one reason only. She had joined a climate march, and the photo had gone viral on Twitter. She didn't give a speech, didn't organize the event, wasn't arrested. She simply was there. But for the new data filtering algorithms now embedded in the U.S. visa system, that was enough. Since 2019, the U.S. has required visa applicants to provide all social media handles used in the past 5 years. Initially, most assumed this was just a background check to flag clear threats: terrorism, trafficking, or cross-border fraud. But by 2025, the purpose of this screening has quietly shifted. Instead of seeking signs of illegality, the system now searches for ideological tendencies. Things once considered abstract, subjective, and unquantifiable, now measured by machine learning models capable of scanning millions of markers in seconds. A post criticizing U.S. immigration policy, a photo taken beside an anti-war symbol, a video you shared from a political YouTube channel. All of it can now be fed into algorithms designed to assess your loyalty or ideological safety. Nebulous metrics with the terrifying power to bar you from entry. Unlike criminal law, where accusations must be proven, the visa evaluation process doesn't need to offer a clear reason. You can be delayed, denied, or placed in indefinite pending status without detailed notification. You'll receive only one line, decision based on overall assessment, and your case may never again see transparent review. In a recent controversial case, a freelance journalist from Argentina was denied a visa to report in New York, where she planned to cover a United Nations conference. The embassy response included no specific reasons, just a note stating her application did not meet current criteria. But on closer inspection, her colleagues realized she had written a series of articles in 2023 about U.S. military interventions in the Middle East. All of those reports had been shared publicly on X, Twitter. What's most terrifying about all this isn't what you wrote. It's that you have no idea which part was considered wrong. There's no public list of banned keywords, no clear rules to follow, no official channel for those who want to explain their context or intent. All you know is that something, decided by some system, has labeled you unwelcome. Surveillance no longer comes from a border officer. It comes from your digital past. No one asks what you believe now. They only need to see what you posted in 2020. In many cases, you're not judged by what you said, but by who you interacted with. One like on a post from a flagged account, and the algorithm can string you into a network of ideological risk. The bigger question here isn't just about privacy, it's about the future of your right to move, to express opinions, to disagree without punishment. If visa policies can penalize you over a hashtag from years ago, who will still dare to speak the truth? Who will still dare to dissent? The world has never been more connected than it is today. But instead of blurring, borders are growing sharper, hidden inside lines of code and behavioral analysis. And if everything you've ever posted can be used to determine you're unworthy of setting foot in a country, then social media, once a symbol of personal freedom, has officially become a courtroom without a trial. Two passports, one wall, when dual citizenship becomes a silent burden. Once a symbol of freedom and ease of movement, the right to hold dual citizenship, especially with passports from developed nations, is now being turned into an invisible burden in the U.S. visa screening system of 2025. That second passport, once seen as political insurance for entrepreneurs, scholars, and global citizens, has become a gateway to suspicion. Not because you did something wrong, but because you might be connected to a place the system now defines as a potential risk. The story of Farah, a French-Iranian biomedical engineer, is a clear illustration of this trend. Born and raised in Marseille, a French citizen, educated in the UK, now working at a biotech company in Zurich. Her French passport is valid, her professional record spotless, no criminal history. But when she prepared to fly to Boston to speak at an international medical conference, she was denied boarding at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Why? Because she had visited Tehran 3 years earlier to see her ailing grandmother, a purely family-related trip, but flagged as prior travel to a risk zone. Farah never received an official reason, only a short email from the airline. Ticket cancelled due to notification from U.S. Border Control. No one told her that visiting her ancestral home had become a fatal marker. No one warned her that data from her Iranian passport, which she still held for family reasons, had been cross-checked within the internal system and assigned her an automatic risk code that could not be appealed. U.S. law has long prohibited dual nationals from sanctioned countries, Iran, Syria, North Korea, from using the Visa Waiver Program, ESTA, even if their second passport is from the UK, France, or Canada. But what's alarming is how that law is being interpreted in 2025, no longer limited to current documents. It's been stretched to include any past affiliations, former citizenship, bloodlines, place of birth, or even relatives still living in sanctioned countries, as grounds to deny you entry, regardless of whether you've ever posed an actual threat. A Syrian-Canadian software engineer, born in Toronto, never set foot in the Middle East, was aggressively questioned at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport about relatives in Homs. The interviewer didn't care about his Canadian passport, only his roots. Since when did bloodline become admissible evidence? The U.S. has never publicly disclosed its criteria for denying visas based on dual nationality. And that's precisely what makes the situation dangerous. When algorithms are given power to make decisions without transparency, the result isn't just a denied visa. It's the erosion of trust in an immigration system once regarded as one of the world's legal benchmarks. Recent reports from international human rights organizations show a surge in unexplained visa rejections for dual nationals, particularly in fields like research, tech, and media. There have been cases where scientists were denied visas simply because their parents once traveled to a restricted region. Students have been rejected due to prior residence in countries once designated as refugee zones. This is not just a humanitarian issue. It's a matter of global strategy. When the U.S. closes its doors to brilliant minds, researchers, and innovators simply because of where they've been, where they belong, or who they're related to, another country will open theirs. And America, once the meeting point of intellect, may be isolating itself without building a single wall. The concept of national security is increasingly being reduced to a cold filter that overlooks personal context, ignores lived realities, and erases human nuance. And if this continues, the day may come when holding two passports is no longer a mark of globalization, but a one-way ticket to silent rejection. Stamps on a passport. When a trip becomes an indictment. In an era where passports were once likened to master keys unlocking the world, 2025 is quietly redefining the right to mobility through something entirely different: travel history. It's no longer about who you are, but where you've been. Not what your intentions are, but which countries have stamped your passport. And at the U.S. border, where technology and data converge, those tiny stamps from past visas can now become silent yet sharp accusations. Imagine you're Lars, a Dutch businessman who frequently travels across the Middle East for work related to agriculture and water desalination. A recent trip brought him to southern Lebanon, where his partner's family owns a large farm collaborating with NGOs. The trip was smooth, without incident, without any violations. But when Lars arrived at JFK Airport to connect to Chicago for an international conference, he was denied entry. Clean passport. Valid visa. The reason? The system flagged a recent itinerary as a potential security risk. No prior warning, no official document. Just a cold apology from a security officer. We can't allow you to enter at this time. And while Lars was still trying to understand what had happened, his luggage was already rerouted to a return flight back to Amsterdam. An immigration lawyer in New York, reviewing the case, said only one sentence: he was flagged under Section 217(12), and the new AI system is expanding its scope without notice. Section 217(12) was originally meant to disqualify visa waiver stay travelers who had visited countries like Iran, Syria, Sudan, or Somalia after 2011. But now that scope is quietly stretching beyond the published list, and even applying to travelers with valid visas. Entry stamps, once symbols of life experience and cultural understanding, are being reinterpreted as evidence of suspicious association. A trip to Xinjiang for humanitarian reasons, a layover in Istanbul, or even a brief transit through Damascus in 2014, any of these could be fed into an algorithm that assigns a risk score. What's terrifying is how this system works. It requires no context. No one asks why you went there, who you were with, or whether it was for humanitarian or personal reasons. The data is raw, emotionless, beyond challenge. Been to a red zone? Flagged. Can you come back? Number? Can you explain? No feedback channel. Can you know why? No right to access the reason for denial. When the border becomes a place where decisions are made based on travel history rather than actual behavior, the immigration control system goes far beyond prevention. It becomes a tool of exclusion based on probability. Not unlike a migratory version of social credit, where your score isn't based on financial debt, but on your geographic footprint. Many Americans of Middle Eastern, African, or even European descent have started reporting being pulled aside for baggage checks, interrogated about past trips, or ordered to open emails and messages at customs. A research student from Belgium was detained at the airport simply because her passport had a Syrian entry stamp from a short-term language exchange 5 years earlier. She had traveled there through an academic program. But to the system, she was a variable to eliminate. The risk doesn't stop with foreign nationals. Even American citizens with travel history to areas of interest are increasingly subject to quiet surveillance through data sharing between airlines, automated checkpoints, and homeland security systems. An investigative journalist from the New York Times was held for 3 hours at customs because he had visited Yemen in 2018 to cover a humanitarian crisis. He's an American citizen, but his passport was no longer assumed to be safe. The question is not where you've been, but whether the system understands why you went, and clearly the answer is no. While the world is trying to reconnect after a pandemic, while nations are building bridges of cooperation, the United States, through a series of invisible algorithms, is turning its borders into silent courtrooms for past journeys. If a trip made for humanitarian ideals, academic exchange, or even a simple family visit can become the reason you're stopped mid-journey, then the right to travel, once considered fundamental in a globalized world, is now being stripped away, piece by piece, in silence. The suspect is no longer the wrongdoer, but the technologist. In 2025, the line between national security and occupational discrimination is blurring at U.S. border checkpoints. If in the past you were detained because of your background, travel history, or nationality, now simply working in the wrong industry or having the wrong app installed is enough to land you on a watch list, get your visa denied, or even prevent you from setting foot on U.S. soil. And those bearing the clearest consequences of this power shift are the intellectuals of the tech world, those working in AI, machine learning, drone systems, and advanced computational science. No conspiracy is needed, no covert operations. All it takes is for you to belong, even indirectly, to a tech ecosystem linked to China, Iran, or any country the U.S. deems a strategic adversary, and you've become a potential threat. An Indian engineer shared that he was interrogated at Los Angeles airport just because he worked for a software company recently funded by an investment firm with ties to Beijing. I've never been to China. I've never signed on to a defense project. But when they opened my laptop and saw an internal app with Chinese labels, they asked me to get up without any further explanation. No charges, no clear violation, just a profile built on probability, what machine learning systems call risk inference, and what ordinary people call programmed prejudice. Leaked internal reports from tech contractors tied to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, show that these new immigration control tools no longer rely solely on paperwork or history. Instead, the system now reads metadata from mobile devices, analyzes installed apps, tracks company domain emails, and assigns risk scores based on inferred industrial connections. A computer vision engineer from Singapore was denied an H-1B visa without explanation. Later, through Immigration Counsel, he discovered he had worked on an agricultural drone project that used an open-source software library developed by a Chinese team in 2017. That indirect connection, entirely legal and public, was still enough to trigger an industry alert. In a world where technology has become the common language bridging nations, the United States, the epicenter of the global tech revolution, is ironically using that very technology to control, restrict, and profile the very experts of this age. Sadly, this not only makes the borders colder, but slows the current of innovation. The consequences are significant. Many large tech companies from Europe to Asia are beginning to suspend sending employees to the U.S. for conferences, collaboration, or assignments. Some corporations have issued internal advisories. Avoid travel to the U.S. if you work in AI, facial recognition, encryption, or dual-use defense technologies. Not for political reasons, but out of fear of being denied entry, detained at the airport, or worse, flagged without clear cause, without a path to appeal. Never before has the word potential carried such dangerous weight. Technological potential, once a plus in visa applications, is now a red flag. Potential to connect, once a reason to invite you in, is now the reason to keep you out, and potential to maybe do something without any specific action has become evidence for suspicion. The bigger question is, who will still dare bring their laptop to the U.S.? Who will still dare log into their GitHub in front of a border agent? Who will still dare to be a pioneer if innovation now means risking silent rejection without explanation? When national borders start judging people not by their actions, but by their assumed capacity for action, this is no longer border control. It's predictive criminalization. And history has shown, every system rooted in vague fear eventually leads to real mistakes. Protest in a photo, gate locked from the outside. When silence becomes policy. You don't need to shout. You don't need to hold a megaphone. You don't need to burn a flag, scale a fence, or raise a slogan. In 2025, all it takes is standing in the wrong place at the right time, or worse, simply being photographed at a protest to be stopped at the U.S. border. One photo, one moment, one piece of geotagged data or facial recognition scan. And just like that, you go from global citizen to flagged profile. Camilla's story, a Chilean student awarded a full scholarship at an Ivy League university, is a bitter testament to this. She once joined a climate march in Santiago in 2022. No speech, no violation. She walked with friends, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, wearing a t-shirt with the slogan, "Save Our Planet." A press photographer captured that moment, Camilla's bright face, surrounded by a chanting crowd. The photo went viral, even featured in an exhibition on youth and climate activism. Camilla didn't know that photo, 3 years later, would be the reason her F1 visa application was frozen indefinitely. No denial letter, no request for additional documents. Just an email from the system stating her application was under further review. She submitted dozens of appeals, every possible document to prove she had never broken any law. But every response was silence. Because in 2025, the U.S. border control system began integrating protest monitoring tools through facial recognition, public data scraping AI, and social network analysis. A protest photo tagged with your name. A video clip showing the crowd where you stood. A tweet you once shared during a surge of emotion. These are no longer seen as freedom of speech, but as potential evidence. The problem is, no one makes the boundary clear. Are you allowed to protest for the environment? Yes. But what if your sign hints at criticism of U.S. policy? Can you protest against war? Certainly. But what if your candlelight vigil photo overlaps with a group the U.S. has placed on a watch list? This ambiguity has sparked widespread fear among young people worldwide. Those who once believed America was a beacon of personal freedom and the right to dissent. Now they ask themselves, could attending a peaceful protest in Berlin get me denied entry to New York? Could a student's speech on human rights mean I'll never step foot in California? The story becomes even more alarming when Americans themselves begin to feel the effects of this scrutiny. A Palestinian-American citizen who had joined a Gaza protest in Washington, D.C., was detained for hours at the airport after a work trip to Malaysia. He was asked to unlock his phone, explain a photo with friends at the protest, and reminded that national security comes first. He had never been charged with anything, but now he felt accused by a system, by a gaze, by the absence of transparency. When peaceful protest, a constitutional right in the United States, becomes a covert reason for flagging someone, then the very foundation of freedom that this country once championed is being eroded from within. Protest is no longer an action. It has become a recorded behavior. And in an age where every image can be traced, geotagged, and facially analyzed, just raising your hand in a crowd, even in support of peace, can be the reason you're stopped at the airport gate. The bigger question is In a world where dissent is essential to holding power accountable, what happens when every act of protest can be interpreted as a threat? And if we begin punishing people simply for having stood in a crowd, then the borders we build no longer protect anything. They only suffocate the belief that even the smallest voice still deserves to be heard. Carbon border. When emissions become the new passport. Until now, the typical questions asked before a visa interview usually centered around, what are you coming to the U.S. for? How long will you stay? Do you have financial support? But in 2025, a new kind of question is gradually emerging, not from consular officers, but from journey-assessing algorithms. How many times have you flown this year? Do you come from a high-emission country? Do you work in heavy industry or fossil fuels? And these seemingly unrelated answers are beginning to significantly affect your right to travel. The U.S. border, once a barrier defined by geography and politics, is entering a new phase, the ecological border. As climate change becomes an unavoidable global concern, a wave of new thinking is rising in policy planning circles, using visas and entry quotas as tools to regulate carbon emissions. And in this environmental battle, it's not the biggest polluters who are punished, but the anonymous individuals from places deemed unsustainable. No official policy has been enacted, but the signs are becoming increasingly clear. Many tourist visa applications from high-emission countries like India, China, and Latin America are being asked for additional documentation or are delayed without clear reason. Meanwhile, several airlines involved in emissions tracking programs have started sharing passenger travel data with U.S. border agencies under the banner of Environmental Responsibility Partnerships. Johan, a businessman from Johannesburg, South Africa, where the economy still relies heavily on mining, recalled being asked to declare his flight history over the past 3 years when applying for a U.S. visa to attend a green investment summit. Even though the purpose of his trip was to discuss clean energy transition, his application was held for more than 2 months because the system is reviewing emission factors related to travel history. Ironically, the person coming to help solve the problem was stopped because he came from where the problem exists. Even worse, some international visa consulting firms have begun advising clients to avoid layovers in Middle Eastern or African airports, not due to security concerns, but because those transit points are now being accumulated into their personal carbon profiles. An undisclosed carbon score algorithm has begun influencing the likelihood of visa approval. This leads to a troubling paradox. A citizen from Norway, a country with low per capita emissions, can fly 7 times a year to luxury resorts and still not be viewed by the system as an environmental burden. Meanwhile, an activist from Bangladesh, who flies just once to attend a climate justice forum, is placed in the high-risk category because his national emissions rating is substandard. Individuals are no longer judged based on their own behavior, but are stereotyped based on the environmental record of the place they live. Rather than designing fair policies that encourage green transition, the current approach is taking on the flavor of punitive climate governance, where borders become tools to control movement using environmental metrics, but lacking transparency and compassion. The ethical value behind emission reduction efforts is undeniable, but when governments start using climate as a reason to filter people, we are no longer talking about the environment. We're facing a new form of discrimination, cloaked in the language of legitimacy, a kind of carbon visa, where no wrongdoing is needed, only that you come from a place labeled as over-emitting. If this trend continues, it's easy to imagine a near future where every citizen must attach an eco-profile to their visa application, listing their electricity usage, vehicle type, and whether their residence uses renewable energy. The question will no longer be how much money you have or what your education is, but are you worthy of flying, based on your carbon footprint, and when the right to travel, once a symbol of globalization, starts being determined by emission data. What's restricted is not just the journey, but hope itself. Hope that people can still be judged by intent, not by where they were born, where they live, or what they are forced to consume.